All right, everybody. So once again, welcome to Entrepreneurial Appetite. This is a series of events dedicated to building community, promoting intellectualism, and supporting Black businesses. And we started back in, I think it was 2018, supporting Mark's Outing Burger Joint here in San Antonio after Mark put a post on his Facebook Live that his business was struggling. Me and my homeboy Jason Bailey got about 35 to 40 young Black professionals together in conversation with State Representative Barbara Gervin Hawkins to talk about how we could thrive in San Antonio, a city where I think Black folks are a minority within a minority. And so over the years, we have evolved into a book club. We have evolved into a club of entrepreneurs, a club of folks who are interested in Black entrepreneurship. But today we have a great pairing because it's ideal. It's one of those ideal episodes where I got the Black author and the Black entrepreneur together, and I'm excited for that. But before we get into that, I want to highlight some history that was made 1 year ago tomorrow. So a few years ago, I hosted a conversation in Denver with Philip Henderson, the older brother pictured here in the middle, and he is a part of Full Circle Everest. He is the first African-American to lead an all-Black expedition up Mount Everest. And so there have been other Black folks who have summited Mount Everest. I think he is the first African-American from the United States, foundational Black Americans. So his ancestry is from slavery in the United States here, to climb Mount Everest. But he's also the first Black person to lead an entirely Black team up Mount Everest. And so I want to highlight that history. So you all be on the lookout for like hashtags and postings on social media tomorrow. And I think what I'll do on my LinkedIn is I will post a video of our conversation that we had with Philip a few years ago and some other entrepreneurs who were working in the outdoors. Also want to let you all know that when I think of supporting Black businesses and Black entrepreneurship, I think about that in the most expansive way possible. And so those of you who are patrons, those of you who donated to join today's show, 10% of that goes back to an endowment that I started at my alma mater, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, my HBCU, where me and my homeboy and my homegirl just started this endowment called From A&T to PhD to support Black folks getting graduate degrees at our Black college. And so I guess it's appropriate that A&T Agricultural is being supported today as we're having a conversation about Black folks and farming in the United States. And also want to make you all aware of my other podcast, the African Americans in Sport Pod Class. I'm a university professor. And so with two of my homeboys from graduate school, we decided to combine forces and turn our class about the African American experience into a podcast and make it accessible for our students during COVID-19. And it just became a podcast that is, accessible for everybody. And so if you are interested in the broad African American experience in sport, check that out. We don't just talk about the athletic part, we talk about the business part, we talk about history, sociology, all of it. So some good content there as well. And without further ado, I'm going to make this handoff to Stephen Lucke, who really in a lot of ways in San Antonio is someone who is a legend. So those of you who live in San Antonio, you all are aware of Gardopia. And so he has really made his footprint on the east side there in San Antonio. And so he's going to be facilitating our conversation as, like I said, our entrepreneur in residence for the night. So he's the CEO and founder of Gardopia Gardens, which is a nonprofit organization that is seeking to reduce obesity, in a community that is mostly Black here in San Antonio by providing fresh foods and vegetables and giving folks an opportunity to grow their own food. And we also have Natalie Braszile, like Brazil without the R, who is our author here today. And she is the author of We Are Each Other's Harvest, but she's also the author of Queen Sugar. So those of you who watch the show Queen Sugar, like her book is the one that inspired that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Stephen. Stephen, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Gardopia Gardens, and then we'll get into the conversation with Natalie.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Langston, thank you for the introduction. As you said, I'm with Gardopia Gardens, and it's just such a blessing to be here with Natalie today. I'm in the presence of a celebrity who's done great work, really highlighting some of the challenges, but also the successes in the Black community around agriculture and farming. So that being said, just a short intro of myself. I operate Gardopia Gardens. We are trying to address the public health and climate crisis that we're currently experiencing, probably two of the biggest challenges this generation will face. And so we have created a prototype of what urban agriculture can look like here in Central and in South Texas with a half-acre micro farm that I'm located at right now. In addition to that, we see ourselves as an education-based nonprofit using a social enterprise method of creating workforce development and educating the next generation to try to make sure that food systems are healthy and accessible and beneficial for everybody involved. And so, with that being said, I'd like to talk to Natalie a little bit. That's what y'all are really here for. Natalie, if you want to introduce yourself, some of the work you've done, and I'd be happy to lead into some questions after that.
Sure. Well, like you said, I'm Natalie Braszile, really an author, to be honest. Wrote Queen Sugar years ago, and then wrote We Are Each Other's Harvest that came out in March or April of 2021. So, just about 2 years ago. And I just have a huge appreciation and sense of admiration and I don't know. I just love farmers. I love Black farmers. So it was my pleasure to write this book and to be here with you today, Stephen.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure everybody at one point in their life has been like, I should write a book, right? At least an autobiography at the minimum. But that's the first thing I would like to talk about with you is, what drove you to become writing? Like, how did you begin that process? Did you study writing in college? Like, did your parents write a book? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I do not come from writers, but I do come from business people. So we'll have to circle back to that. I was just a kid who loved reading as a kid. I loved books. I can still remember, summertime rolling around, and my favorite thing to do would be to go to the library and get some books, and then bring them back to my room to read. So I've been a lifelong reader. And then probably when I was in high school, actually, I fell in love with writing. I took a class my senior year of college in a short story, and it was unlike any other English class I'd ever taken. And that just kind of ignited something in me. And I thought, I love this. And so I majored in English in college, went back and worked in a family business for a while, but always knew I wanted to write, and finally just got to the point where I was like, I have to do it. I can't wait any longer. And that kind of launched me. And that first book was Queen Sugar. Back in, I won't tell you how long ago that was, but it took a long time, started a long time ago, but that kind of set me on the path.
Okay. And when you decided to write Queen Sugar, what was the impetus for that? Because you could have written about anything, right? I mean, sure, you have a ton of different life experiences. You say that you love farmers. Why do you love farmers, and why Queen Sugar?
It's funny. When I think back, well, first of all, let me say this. So I come from a long tradition of people who really loved the land. On my mother's side, she was an avid gardener, and her mother was an avid gardener. And before that, on my mother's side, my great-great-grandfather was, after emancipation, he was enslaved. After emancipation, he was a farmer and a beekeeper and a landowner in Georgiana, Alabama. And so I think just absorbed this love of growing things and, having my hands in the soil on my mother's side. And then on my dad's side, they were not farmers in Louisiana, but my dad did have this really interesting connection to the earth. He loved, as a kid, he would tell us stories about when he was a kid and he would hunt and he would fish, and that was just kind of his engagement with the soil. And so I think in probably both ways, I just always felt this love of land and the earth and growing things. And that just kind of stuck with me. And so when I started writing Queen Sugar, I actually did not start writing a book that had anything to do with farmers, if I'm being totally honest. It was just about this young woman who picks up and leaves LA with her daughter and goes down to Louisiana because her life is kind of falling apart. But when I would think about what made for a good story, I knew that that character had to have like something that was pulling her, right? Or something that was driving her. And I kind of stumbled upon this idea that she would inherit some land. And actually my husband is the one who suggested that. And the moment he said it, Stephen, it was like something locked into place. And I was like, oh, wow, that works. That, and all of a sudden, this book that I was writing kind of took on greater historical significance. And then I had to get to the sugarcane part, because where my family's from in South Louisiana, where my dad grew up, they grow crawfish and rice. They don't even grow sugarcane, right? And that's what I knew from going down and spending time with my relatives. Well, neither of crawfish and rice aren't really poetic crops. They're not, they're fine, but they're not interesting to write about, right? And so I happened to be in Louisiana for a friend's birthday party. And she, it turns out, owned, her mother owned 2,000 acres of sugarcane land.
Oh, wow, that's a good amount.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, I didn't even know at the time that sugarcane grew in Louisiana. But when I went down for her birthday party and I was telling her, I can't find a crop for my characters to inherit, she said, well, let me take you to my mother's land. And that was like the last little piece that had to fall into place, because all of a sudden I had this character who was going to go down and inherit some land, because she'd inherited some land. And then it was sugarcane. And then I started to think about the history of sugar and agriculture, and all of this stuff just fell into place. And that launched me on this path that became Queen Sugar, And I also think when I was down there researching for the book, I hardly saw any sugarcane farmers who were Black. And I was like, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. This cannot possibly be. And so all of that kind of fed the story.
Beautiful. I love when things sort of just fall into place like that.
Yes.
I've seen some comments about some other names, but yeah, crawfish and rice definitely would have maybe been a little bit harder to pull people in. But Queen and Sugar, those are two pretty high touted things. Okay, so you write Queen Sugar. It does well. And then did you immediately go into the next book that we're going to dive into, or did you take some time off?
Well, I don't think I've ever really taken time off, if I'm honest. I don't think I have. But here's the thing. So after Queen Sugar, the book came out, and then after the show aired, what I noticed was it seemed to spark a conversation that had been dormant with Black people, right? Black and brown people. And that was this idea of what land meant to Black people, Black and brown people historically. And just the whole constellation of questions around land stewardship and health and food sovereignty and, intergenerational wealth, right? All of those questions that I was kind of thinking about for the book, all of a sudden, I saw that people were really starting to think about these things, because they would come to me, like when I was on my book tour or whatever, and they would say to me, I have land in my family, or I come from farmers and I never really appreciated what that meant. But, Queen Sugar has really made me rethink that. And so I could see that people were making the same kind of connections that I was making in the book and then in the show. And so when I got to We Are Each Other's Harvest, an editor approached me about writing a nonfiction book. And first she wanted me to write it. She wanted me to do something was like a behind the scenes look at Queen Sugar, the TV show. And I was like, I can't do that. I can't deliver that book. But as I thought about it, and I thought about the few Black farmers who I had met, right? As I was working on Queen Sugar, I thought, you know what? I want to give these people a platform. And I want readers to understand that I'm not just talking about something that happened in the past, right? Or something fictional that's made up on television. I want readers to understand that there are Black people out there doing this work today. And I wanted to really celebrate those people, and say to people, all farmers aren't white, which was the perception, right?
Mhm.
And so there was a whole other kind of conversation that I wanted to start. And the best way to do that was with this book where I was, profiling real people.
Sure. No, I love it. And I think I skipped a step because again, on the idea of writing.
Mm-hmm.
So one, how long did it take you to write Queen Sugar? And then from the time that it was finished, what was the struggle to get it published and like get it in bookstores?
That's a sad story. So sad, but with a happy ending. So Queen Sugar took 11 years to write. That's just, 11 years.
That's consistency right there. I applaud.
Once I was in it, it was like, well, I've got to keep going, and I went back to grad school and, got an MFA in that time. And I had to learn how to write a novel. I mean, there was just a lot happening during those 11 years, but I was working on Queen Sugar every day. Jobs.
Like an hour in between, like
raising kids, all that. That was my project. And going down to Louisiana and researching and, coming back and just trying to take it all in, to craft this story. And so when I finished the book, the first time I thought I was finished was in 2009. And I thought, by that time I had devoted like 10 years to the book. And I thought I was finished. And that tells you how long I was writing it, if you do that math.
A decade.
It was a decade. And I thought I was finished. And so I sent the book out to, a very small handful of agents, and I got all rejections. Everybody rejected the book. Everybody, it was probably that first round, probably 6 or 7. So not a lot, but it was enough.
I mean, that's enough. Yeah.
It's enough. And I was discouraged because, I thought I've invested 10 years of my life into this story. And I know that there's something here, but I don't know why people can't see it, right?
Yep.
And so I went back and I spent another year and I revised it again. That's year 11.
Okay.
And then I sent the book back, and I sent
to the same 6 or what?
To 2 of the same people, because some people had just rejected it outright. They'd said, thanks, but no thanks, I'm not interested. But 2 of the agents had offered me comments, like feedback. And so I thought, okay, well, at least they didn't slam the door in my face. So I ended up sending the book back to them. And one of them said to me, well, now I like the beginning more than I like the end. And before I like the end more than the beginning. And, she was just like, oh my God, she was just not helpful.
Yeah.
The other woman read the book in 24 hours and said, I love it.
24 hours? Sheesh.
Read the book and said, I love it.
Speed reading. Love that.
And that was the woman who ended up being my agent. And then we had to, then we had to go pitch it to publishing houses, and this woman, Pam Dorman at Penguin Random House, ended up buying the book. But it was a lesson in patience and perseverance. And I mean, in this way, I relate so much to what farmers do, because at some point, like you're facing nothing but headwinds, right? The weather's not cooperating, the seeds don't grow.
Too much rain.
Too much rain. It's just like everything is hard. And yet something makes you get up and do it again, right?
Yeah.
And that is kind of where I see, that's where I draw a lot of inspiration from farmers. And also because, just like me, the story was only real to me. It was only real in my head, right? And I was basically pulling that story out of the air, much the way farmers are just like pulling that out of the air. You have a vision, but you've got to plant those seeds. You have to nurture those little seeds and those little, seed starts, and you got to tend the ground. It's all the same. It's the same. And I think I just see even though I come from farmers, but I have a garden every now and then, but I'm not a farmer. But what I draw inspiration from is that resilience and that perseverance and that willingness to kind of stick with it in the face of all the odds,
Well, you're inspiring me, because you can do things for so long. And there's this book, I think it's called like 3 Feet from Gold, right? And so at year 10, you could have been like, that's it, just put it on the bookshelf, move forward. But as you're saying, the synonyms around farming and life in general are just so much connected. And you never know when that tree is going to sprout. You never know when it's going to provide you fruit. I planted this plum tree in my front yard, and I'm about 6 years in, still no plums. But every year I got hope.
Yeah.
I got hope. And I know it is. And you talk about making edits and things of that sort. I might have to put a graft on that tree.
Exactly.
So there's sometimes you gotta adjust and you gotta pivot. Okay.
Right.
So 2014 is that when Penguin published Queen Sugar?
Yeah.
And okay, so they published it 2014. It seems to go off pretty well. When did you get approached for a TV show? Like, what? Did you imagine that?
So that came first I'm trying to think back. So the book came out in February of 2014. And then a little before the book came out, I had actually been up in Seattle at a writer's retreat and met this woman who was Oprah's book editor. And lucky day. And she actually heard me read a chapter from the book, because that's something that you do when you go to these writers, colonies and residencies. And so anyway, she heard me read, and she said to me afterwards, she said, I really love that. And when the galleys come out, send me a copy. I was like, okay, yes, absolutely. And so a galley is the unpublished, it's like a mock-up of the book, right? It's not the hard copy that you buy in the shelves. It's what they call a galley, or an advanced reader copy. And that's what it's got the cover on it, and it's all printed up and everything, but it's what they send out. It's what the publishers send out to like critics for reviews, and they might send it to book clubs, things like that, right? To generate advanced publicity.
A little bit of buzz of it around it.
Exactly. And so I had my editor send her a copy, and she loved it. And she's the one who eventually got it into Oprah Winfrey's hands, right? And so I knew that was a vague possibility, you know, because she and I had spoken, but I didn't know for sure that it was going to happen. And then much later, like in 2014 or maybe early 2015, I was out on my book tour, you know, still, and my agent called and said, "Hey, I just got this call from Oprah Winfrey's team, and they want to option Queen Sugar." And I was like, "Oh my God,
It's
wow,
happening. Yeah.
wow, you know, that happened. That
Oh
happened."
my goodness.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy, but
It
it's
is. I know. Yeah, life is a movie, and you're making movies in the movie.
exactly. So, you know, and then it just kind of took off from there.
All right. Well, again, that's just an amazing story in itself. I want to go ahead and switch gears a little bit and talk a little about your most recent book. I have it here as well. Langston, thank you for sending it my way. We are each other's harvest. So again, you got Queen Sugar under your belt. You know, you got this. When did We Are Each Other's Harvest sort of come into play after Queen Sugar? And
Uh-huh.
what was that like, that
Yeah.
process?
So I started thinking about We Are Each Other's Harvest probably in late 20, let's see, that was pre-pandemic, late 2017, probably.
Okay. So about
And
3 years later.
about 3 years later, but I just started thinking about it. And I started thinking about what kind of, so this editor called me, this nonfiction editor. And so like Queen Sugar is fiction, right? That's like made up stories. A different editor got in touch with me and said that she wanted to do some kind of project. And that's when I was saying earlier that she originally pitched this idea of doing this, you know, behind the scenes look at Queen Sugar, the show. And
Okay.
I had to tell her, you know, I go to the set, but I'm not involved in that production. So if you want like interviews with the cast and the crew, I cannot give you that. But then I started thinking about it, and I was talking to my agent, and she said to me, "Well, what kind of book would you want to write if you could write any book, nonfiction, what would it be?" And I thought about it, and I started to think about the handful of Black farmers I knew. And I started to think about how generous they had been with me, with their time. And I started to, like this old Black farmer, Cleveland Provost, who lives in Four Corners, Louisiana. No, he lives in Jeanerette, Louisiana. And he had like taken me under his wing, right? And so every time I would go down to Louisiana, Mr. Provost and I would hang out, and he took me to a farm auction, you know, an equipment auction, and would just
Okay,
talk
that's
to me
fun.
about, you know, farming. And he was like my grandfather almost. And I started to think about him, and I started to think about other farmers who I may have heard of in different parts of the country. And I started to think about the big question in Queen Sugar, which was this question around there being so few Black farmers, right? And I thought to myself, you know, I want to shine a spotlight on those people, and I want to give them a chance to tell their own stories and speak for themselves. And I really wanted to kind of, like I was saying earlier, I wanted to try to write a book that told the story of Black people and land and agriculture. And I wanted to say to primarily Black people, first of all, not all farmers are middle-aged white guys, right? Because that's
Yep,
the
yep. The stereotype, yeah.
That's a stereotype. And I wanted to say
With the
to,
cowboy hat.
exactly, you know, and I
Yeah.
also wanted to say to people, hold up, this is something that we should be proud of, right? Because I know that, you know, for Black people, a lot of times historically, there's been a stigma around farming, right? And the narrative has been get off the land, get as
Yep.
far away as you can. right?
Mhm.
Go to New York, go to Philadelphia, go to LA, go to Chicago, be a professional,
Yeah.
right?
Move forward, progress your family. Don't go backwards.
Progress is always moving forward and moving away from the land. And I was
Yeah.
saying that's not all correct, right? I understand that, but that's not the whole story. And there is something to be learned and celebrated about understanding our connection to the land, this historical connection, and not just historical, it's with people like you, the next generation of farmers who have a vision and who are so smart and so ambitious and so dedicated, right? And that's what I was trying to say to people is we are in the middle of this thing, and people like Stephen are lucky, are carrying us forward, or the Penniman sisters, or there's like a whole generation of people who are fostering this new movement and thinking differently about farming. And we need to pay attention to these folks and celebrate them. So that's what I wanted to do with We Are Each Other's Harvest. But I wanted to try to figure out a way to tell that story in a way that was going to be interesting and dynamic, and beautiful and uplifting and celebratory. Yes, we're talking about the USDA and, Pickford versus Glickman and all the obstacles and the hurdles and the trials, and tribulations, but that's not the whole story. The other part of that story is a story of resilience and possibility and determination and hope and vision, right? That's what you are doing. And
Mhm.
and I wanted to do that in a way that people could enter the book and see themselves in the book and be inspired and read poems and stories and first person narratives. I wanted all that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a lot, but I feel like in this book you were able to achieve that. Recently I went to the African American Museum in DC, and a lot of times Black history starts around slavery, right? And part of that they did tell that story. They told story leading into Africa a little bit, but at the end of the museum, on the top floor, they have the modern
Mm,
successes and trials, tribulations of Blacks in America. And you're right, we do have to tell the positive. It can't just always be about the negative, right? Because if not, then we pick that in our heads that it's always going to be a negative story. But we need to tell those positive, uplifting stories that are there. They're
that's
there,
right.
and we just have to dig a little deeper,
That's
and
right.
we can find them all around us. So you went to multiple farmers. Did you interview all these people in person? Did you do a lot of Zoom? Did you tell me a little bit about your journey gathering these stories for your book?
Yeah. Yeah. So everybody I'm in the book is somebody who I met in person. And I spent a
Oh,
year.
impressive.
Yeah, I spent a year. I wish I'd given myself more time, to be honest, because, I told my editor that I could deliver that book in a year. And
Wow,
I
that's a hefty
know,
lift.
what was I thinking? I was like,
Still off that Queen Sugar high. I
seriously,
got
seriously. And I was like, okay, I was thinking, okay, I cannot write another book that's going to take 11 years. I cannot do that.
yeah.
Right. But so I gave myself a year, but then I went down this rabbit hole, Stephen, and started meeting all these amazing farmers, amazing, all across the country. I was going to Alaska. I was going to
Alaska farmers?
Alaska,
Huh.
Alaska, because there was this young Black woman, her name is Melanie Edwards, and I found her on Instagram. And in this Instagram post, she was holding this enormous beet. And I was like, who is that? Right. And so I messaged her and I said, I'm writing this book and, I'd love to come to see you. And she said, well, you can come to see me. And at the time she was a farm manager on Whidbey Island in Seattle. And she said,
Okay.
you can either come to visit me here, or she said, I'm about to go to farm school in Alaska. And I was like, bet, that's where I'm going. And
That's
so
the story.
that's the story. And so I ended up, going and spending 4 days with her at farm school in Alaska. And then I met, Naima and Leah Penniman, and I ended up
That's
going to
big.
Soulfire Farm,
Yeah.
and
How was that? What was that like?
oh my God, so inspirational. So I get goosebumps thinking about their vision and their commitment and what they have built there. And it was exactly this time of year. It was like mid-May. And I went up to upstate New York and I had a photographer with me, and it was just the most welcoming experience, and they told me about how they had cleared that land, Leah and her husband Jonah and their, small team had cleared that land by hand.
By
And
hand.
by hand. They
That's
didn't have any
dedication.
money, and just all the things that
Yeah.
they did to bring Soulfire into what it has become. And then we were at lunch and I had read Leah's book, Farming While Black. Fantastic book. I knew about that book, and I hadn't read it cover to cover because it's all about it's like a practical guide to starting to farm. But in that book, there was a poem that Naima had written, and she recited that poem at lunch. And I was like, okay, you have to write a poem for my book. Would you write a poem? And so Leah ended up writing an essay. Naima wrote a poem. We were there for like 2 days and took all these photos, and it was just amazing.
Yeah,
And then they
magical moment.
introduced,
Historical.
yeah, it was amazing. And then they introduced me to people. And so for the next year, I was just like on the hunt to try to gather as many of these stories as I could. And honestly, I would love to do a We Are Each Other's Harvest Volume 2, because I didn't even scratch the surface, really.
Yeah. Many
You
more
know,
stories to tell.
we need more stories. We need more stories. I could do another whole volume of all the other farmers. Karen Washington,
She's in New York as well.
yeah, no, she's not in the book because I had met her, but I wish
Ah,
I
I
had.
see, I see. Okay.
Shirley Sherrod, the matriarch of this movement. I mean, there's so many people who I wish I had included, but the clock was ticking and I had to turn in the book. But I'd love to have you in the book. You know,
Right.
there,
Let's get a date for you to come down to San
you know,
Antonio. Part 2. Right here.
honestly,
Y'all heard it here live, y'all. Part 2.
honestly. So, but I'm trying to celebrate everybody, and I'm trying to lift up these people and amplify their voices, and that's it.
So visiting all these folks, how many states did you go to? How many miles did you rack up? And more importantly, what was a common thread that you found between all of these farmers? Was there a common denominator that you found amongst?
I would say everybody loves the land. Every single farmer. They love what they do. Even when it's hard, they love what they do. And they love to see things grow. And they love to provide food for their families and their communities. And that is whether they're a large, farmer or a micro farmer. Everybody is driven by this desire to take care of the earth and grow things and be in community with other people. I think that's probably the common denominator.
You know, I was here at Gardopia on Monday or Tuesday on my laptop, like I am right now, and looking out at the garden, sort of how y'all see behind me. And we have different types of sunflowers, right? There's big ones, little ones, pink ones, black ones, red ones. And we have these wild sunflowers, but I had planted a few mammoth sunflowers because I like to have edible sunflowers to eat, but we never have like so many of them. But I'm looking and I see 2 mammoth sunflowers, and I just like was like so happy. There's so much happiness in me at that moment in time, and then I reflected on it, on how happy that made me, right? And so people being out in nature, people seeing things grow, people being in a healthy environment is critical to our mental, our physical, our spiritual health. So, you know, that rings true to me when you say that every farmer loves the land. I think every human loves the land, right? But you know, we have migrated to these cities. It's the first time in human history that the majority of people live in urban versus rural. And so we migrated to these cities, but these cities are not healing for us, right? There's just concrete jungles, literally. And something that I would love to see is we need to continue having our green space and our rural space, but also here in the inner city. So that just rings very true to me. Let's see here. You know, again, you did a ton of interviewing. Pictures in this book, there's a ton of visuals. Tell me a little bit about the idea behind that. How are you choosing these? Did you have one photographer who went with you? Was it multiple photographers?
It was mostly one photographer. So all of the portraits of the farmers, except for one, were I took Melanie's photo. She took the majority of the photos. Then some of the photos in the book are things that I took because I love photography and I'm a visual person anyway. And so some of the photographs are mine, but most of the portraits are the photographers. Her name was Alison Guti. And I think she did a beautiful job. You know, I think she just really captured these farmers and their spirits, and I just love that. You know, I wanted the book to be accessible, and I wanted it to be something that you could dip into and out of, and you know, you can start at the beginning, but you don't have to start at the beginning. And it would just be, I was talking to Langston before we started, and he was saying, you know, he said, it's like you curated this book. And he said, it's like a piece of art. And that's what I wanted. You know, I didn't know that going in. I just had this impulse that I wanted all of these elements to be in the book together, but it's not like I had a model for that, you know? So I just kind of followed my gut and thought, well, what would I want to see in a book? I love poetry. So I wanted poems in the book, you know, by like amazing Black poets, amazing. I wanted that to be in the book. I wanted stories. I just wanted it to feel alive, you know, and not like some flat, one-dimensional, heavy thing.
Sure.
So
Just a dry index.
exactly.
There's a lot of life to it. You know, I'm looking at it. I think you did a great job also because again, a lot of times we think of farmers as white males, and if it's not a white male, then it's a male in general.
Right.
But you highlighted a lot of women farmers. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, because I mean, you know, Black women have been part of this agricultural tradition forever. And I really wanted to celebrate that work, you know, and I wanted to, like, let's look at the cover of the book, for example, right? I wanted, and I'll show it to your audience for those who haven't seen it, but, you know, so this is the cover. And that's Naima and Leah Penniman of Soulfire Farm. And I chose them because I wanted the cover of the book to signal to people, this is the future, right? You don't know this whole story, because we were deciding between like a more traditional, we were deciding between that photo and, see if I can find it. And this photo, which I also loved, right? It's a Black man on a mule, right? Plowing a field. And I was trying to decide between those two covers. And I thought, as much as I love that black and white, that archival photo, I thought if people see that on the cover of this book, they're going to say, oh, I know that story, right? That's a story about struggle. That's an old story. That's history. But with this cover, it's like, it's looking forward and not just looking back. And I wanted that to be part of it because, you know, I'm probably repeating myself. I wanted people to understand that there's a whole new generation of people doing this work, and they are going to carry us forward. You, Stephen, of Gardopia, you're going to carry us forward, right? And so it had to be fresh, and it had to be lively, and it had to be hopeful and forward-looking. And that's why I chose the cover, you know.
All these, well, first of all, when I see this, I'm like, where did they get those hoes at? Like, I need to get me a garden hoe like that. They're not playing around.
They are not playing around. They are serious.
Yeah, they're there to do some
Fierce.
work.
Yeah.
So I've never seen that. You know, in talking about the future and innovation, you know, in the past, I feel like people thought agriculture was low tech.
Yeah.
We know that agriculture is going high tech. There's GPS tractors, there's Wi-Fi, there's sensors, there's all these different things. But I do just want to really quick rattle off a few farmers who have been innovative in the past. And then it leads me to my question of who did you see who's doing some really innovative stuff out there? So before that, Henry Blair invented the seed planter and the cotton planter, and he was the second African American to get a patent. George Washington Carver invented crop rotation and modern day composting. Frederick McKinley Jones invented mobile refrigeration. That's big. Booker T. Watley, you know, at Tuskegee University, wrote a book on how to make $100,000 on an acre as a farmer and pretty much revolutionized community-supported agriculture, CSAs. Booker T. Washington on the Second Morale Act of 1890, outlawing discrimination in public schools, which opened up more opportunity for agricultural learning. John W. Mitchell, Eastern Columbus Credit Union, helped with purchasing power and had one of the largest youth 4-H programs in the nation. And John W. Boyd, more modern, established the National Black Farmers Association, fighting USDA discrimination. So there's a long history of innovation of Black farmers. So tell me like one or two that you like, I have not seen that before. Did you meet a farmer like that?
Ooh, I'm trying to think. Honestly, I don't know that I met any. I mean, all these people you mentioned are people who, you know, I didn't know all those names, but I knew a lot of those names. I'm just trying to think of somebody who was doing something really innovative. I'll have to think. I mean, to me, it was more about like the innovation was coming in the form of reaching back to reach forward, right? Like,
Okay.
for example, the organic practices that Naima and Leah used, or that Kamal Bell in North Carolina used, or Stanley Hughes and Linda Leach. They're an older couple in the book who have a century farm. That farm has been in their family for over 100 years, and it has been organic the whole time.
100 years organic?
100 years of organic farming. And Stanley tells this story in the book of his great-grandfather was farming on that land and would plant fish heads in with the plants as fertilizer and learned that from Native Americans, right?
Okay.
Because he could not afford the the manufactured fertilizer, right? And so I think that's more of what I saw. I didn't go to like anybody who was doing like hydroponics or any of that stuff.
Indoor farming.
Yeah, I didn't
Okay.
get to those people, they're out there, I don't know. But it was more about the way people were like doing no-till, uh,
Okay.
planting. That it was that kind of stuff, and the way
Sure.
they were thinking about how to do less harm. That's what I ran into more. And then, like with the Nelsons, they're a family, they farm like 3 or 4,000 acres, but they're more commodity farmers. But they have, like you said, the high-tech equipment and all that stuff. So it was kind of a mix. But
Okay.
can I
No,
ask
I
you
think
a
that's,
question?
yeah, sure.
How did you get into farming? What inspired you?
Well, you know what inspired me was health. I was not a tree hugger. I was not an environmentalist. I was a meat and potatoes guy, played sports. And so I wanted to be healthy as much as
Mm,
possible. So in college, trying to optimize my health, um, I became aware of nutrition and I took an introduction to nutrition 101, right? And that's when I learned about the obesity epidemic. So then like my whole um vision on health changed. It changed from I want to be as healthy as possible as there's a lot of sick people out there,
mhm.
right? So how can I give back? And how I can give back is through my information and knowledge. And so I kept taking more nutrition classes. Um, and I found out, I'm like, well, even if I eat a plant-based diet, I could be eating crops that have all these pesticides on them. And so
Mm,
I could still get cancer. I could still be sick later on in life. And so I need to get to the source, to the root of this, which is growing food. So I was like, the best nutritionist would be a farmer because you would know the calcium, the magnesium, the nitrogen, the potassium. You would be directly inputting those minerals into the soil, being absorbed through the plant. You're not using any hazardous, like you're saying, organic, restorative, regenerative, indigenous permaculture practices. Um, and so I needed to learn how to grow food. That's it. And so I literally went down this wormhole of studying horticulture and working in landscaping to the point that I felt like I had enough knowledge to start my own garden. So I went in my front yard and got some corn seeds and some tomato
okay.
seeds and just started planting in the middle of the summer. I had
Wow.
no clue what I was doing in regards to fruits and vegetables, like none at all. But I was like, I'm just gonna try. Something's
Wow.
gonna, hopefully get germinated. And what the real spark for me as I started growing and had some success is I had this tomato plant and it just kept growing and growing and I just kept trellising it with string, right,
Mm.
to the point where it grew on the roof. So I had like 100-pound tomato plant, and then you get the little green tomatoes but they're hidden, and if you've never
Uh-huh.
seen a tomato plant you can't see it, and
Uh-huh.
then boom, they turn red. But
Yeah.
guess what, I didn't like tomatoes. So I didn't really like vegetables. So I'm like, but I grew it, I'm gonna try it. So I'm 21 and probably at this point in time I popped the tomato in my mouth and I'm like, that's not too bad.
Right,
That's
right,
not too bad. So then it was
right.
like, psh, it
Wow.
opened my palate. I was willing at that point to try any fruit or vegetable. I was like, there, everything's game.
Wow.
used to only eat, potatoes and carrots, maybe some spinach, but now I had this whole world of healthy, nutritious food that I was willing to try. And from there, I really never looked back.
Mm. Amazing.
I will say, just to add to that, again, it started out as gardening. And most guys don't think they're gardeners. What's the stereotypical gardener? Probably a white lady with a garden hat on, right? That's a gardener. That's not cool to be a gardener. Not only are you going backwards, right? Slavery's over. I'm not a migrant farmer. I'm moving forward. I'm going to be a programmer. I want to be a doctor. I want to be an engineer. All that stuff. So um, I decided that I wanted to be an advocate for healthy living. And I
Mm.
thought that gardening was a good way to do it because it brings people together. And if you can show people that you're growing food you're working with livestock, you're out in nature, then it can become less of a what is your gender or whatever. It's just we're humans. We're
Mm-hmm.
humans. We need to be connected to nature. We're sick. Our planet is sick. And this is a gateway drug to creating a healthier, more sustainable population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That's
So,
inspiring.
that's what got me into it. And now it's going beyond gardening and even farming, from a health justice perspective, to a food justice perspective, to really a land justice perspective. I have a quote from NPR for between like 1910 and 1990. I think approximately 90% of Black-owned land was lost.
True.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy. And you talked about in a past podcast that we're all on stolen land at this
Yeah.
point, right? So, but that being said, indigenous populations were still given some reservations. Not to say that that's a fair trade.
Right.
That's not a
Right.
fair trade. But there is no historical evidence of large swaths of land being given to Black people, and so reparations are still due to this point in time. And so we have to find ways to create land trusts, land banks. Just recently, Compton Community Garden, I saw the owner's trying to sell the property. There's a documentary on a 10-acre farm in LA. Same thing happened. You just see these stories happen over and over and over again. And so until we have a real address to land ownership and property access and the way that we view ownership, we're just going to continue to have some of the same problems, right? But these little havens that we're creating are critical to be
Yeah.
able to grow the movement.
Yeah. Yeah. Bravo. I agree with you. I agree with you.
Well, Langston, I saw you popped on. You wanted to
Yeah.
take the wheel, brother?
No, see, but Natalie did such a good job of like, listen, Natalie, you need to host podcasts because what you just did right there, segueing into Stephen. I had a question for you. Now I gotta ask Stephen a question before I get to you.
Okay.
So Stephen, this podcast is gonna go beyond San Antonio. So just can you give me the anatomy or the philosophy behind Gardopia? Like where it's located, why it's located where it is, how people in the community get to use it, and a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, again, sort of being in college, learning about gardening and horticulture and growing, I had a passion to get outside of those bubbles that sometimes we can be in at the university setting. So I told my professors that I wanted to serve my community, and they said, "All right, let's go look around a little bit." So they eventually connected me to the East Side Promise neighborhood, which is District 2, which is, the neighborhood that I grew in and the community, and the idea of being able to address food deserts in that community through community gardening and urban agriculture. And so the East Side Promise neighborhood, which was an initiative of President Obama, essentially is looking at neglected and impoverished communities and how they can create public and private investment to help those communities. Now, there is a double-edged sword to that because it can also spur gentrification, which is happening at the same time as they're trying to address some of the education and health inequities. Long story short, there are some metrics around healthy living, which include physical activity and access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And guess what? Gardens do both of that. So we were able to start some youth gardening programs at the local community center and elementary school. From there, sort of seeing all of these school gardens that were sort of being neglected for one reason or another. I felt that there was a niche for an organization to be able to sustain that, to be able to have these youth learn. Because how are we going to create young BIPOC farmers if they don't even know about farming, right? If they don't know how to grow a plant? We got to go beyond the lima bean project, right? And so being in the East Side and in that community, the San Antonio Housing Authority reached out and they had a couple of vacant lots that were being neglected, and really were a epicenter for crime, sort of the broken window theory to a certain extent. And so they did different things. They did more police officers. They did drug raids. They did a shot spotter technology where they could find a gunshot to a pinpoint in a 1 mile radius. But somebody had this crazy idea to do crime prevention through environmental design. So, let's plant some trees. Let's cut the grass. Let's pick up the trash. Let's start a garden. These are ways that we can address neglect in our community and bring people together, really, is what it comes down to. And so, they said, all right, let's start this community garden. And they gave us $500 to get started.
Oh, wow.
But I was like, we're gonna make it work. We're gonna make it work. So I came out here on Saturday mornings and invited the community out. And sometimes it was one person, sometimes it was 10. Just little by little every weekend. We were able to build up this space, and so we have reduced crime. Crime has gone down, significantly, significantly. If I hesitate to say zero, but we have not had issues for a while. And no community wants crime in it. Nobody's like, oh, I want to live in a crime-ridden community, right? That's nobody. If a mom can't walk her kid to school and can't walk past a lot without getting harassed, that's an issue for the entire community. And so how can we continue to replicate that? But also it goes beyond that. It goes to workforce development, so creating jobs for the community. And we've been able to create about 16 jobs since our inception here at Gardopia. And now we're able to do outreach. We're at 25 plus schools. We're at community centers. We're at churches. We've worked with hospitals and clinics. We are currently in the process of working with almost 6 school districts in San Antonio. That sounds like a lot. There's 16. We got more to go, right? My thought is, just like in the 1920s during World War I, there was a school garden army. And in World War II, there was victory gardens. Everybody was growing something. It was just a couple of generations ago that everybody was growing some of their food, and we were healthier as a population. And I really want to get back to that. I want us to say, hey, you can be a doctor, you can be a writer, you can be a professor, you can be whatever you want to be, but you can also be connected to nature, be a good steward of the environment, and hey, you might get a tomato or two. Is what we're looking at. So the east side of San Antonio is a historic African American community. As we know, in Texas across the board, but in the United States, populations and demographics have changed. But we're experiencing gentrification in this moment. Our property value when we got here was valued at 17,000. 17,000. And then from there it went up to 34. And then it went up to 50. This year they have valued this property that was a vacant lot, high crime, shootings, you name it, it is valued at $100,000.
Wow.
Wow. How did it go up 500% in 7 years?
Wow.
That's crazy. That's crazy. So again, there's some big issues that we need to address in regards to land ownership, access, taxes, property values. It's crazy because we're getting taxed out of properties. It's happening right now in this moment. But I'm happy to say that we are pushing at policy and legislative levels. I was in Austin yesterday trying to get agricultural exemptions for smaller farms so that we can have our valuation of our land stay at a forward, because we need farmland to stay. As this farmland gets eaten up and we create this urban sprawl, it's just going to continue to aid to the environmental issues that we're having. So, that's a little bit more of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
So
Interesting.
Stephen was ready for that question.
Totally.
He
I
was ready
loved
for
it.
that question. Yeah. If you do get a chance to come to San Antonio, you will see that Stephen is doing amazing work. I think it's that movie The Martian with Matt Damon, where he got stuck on Mars or whatever. And he put the dome up and he had all the things he needed to, Stephen has this trailer that's kind of like that. It's in the middle. So I went over there. He was explaining if you put this on a desert island, you could live for 10 years just in the things in this pod. So he's thinking listen, if people get stranded somewhere, if Armageddon happens and we have one helicopter, we can just take the pod and just drop it where people are and have the instructions in there and you'll be able to sustain yourself. So he's thinking
interesting.
he's thinking big, and he is he's taking he's almost doing a reversal of that notion of staying on the farm, staying connected to the land as the old way of doing things. And he's really progressive with the way that he thinks about his impact throughout the community. So Stephen is doing some really amazing and dynamic work here. I want to make sure that we get to one of the questions that we have in the Q&A. And this is from Ashley, and Ashley also has some interesting comments in the chat that I'm gonna get to as well. So Ashley is asking, aside from the importance of the connection to the land, what are some of the other life lessons you've taken away after meeting with several farmers around the country? And she's also wondering, have you explored interviewing farmers of the African diaspora in other countries?
So I'll answer the second question first, and the answer is yes. I did it domestically, but there's an organization up outside of Buffalo, New York.
That's where I'm from.
Okay, it's called Providence PRC. Providence, I can't believe it. PRC, Providence something collective. Amazing. They work with Somali Bantu farmers, a whole host of refugee farmers from different countries who come to the United States as refugees. They were farmers in their homelands. They get here, and what they want to do is farm, but they don't have any resources. And so PRC is this amazing nonprofit organization that gives these farmers like small plots of land to grow food, but then they give them all the tools, they give them the funding, everything to help them not just grow food for themselves and their communities, but help them become entrepreneurial. So they're just an amazing organization. And I was there last June. There was a farmer from Bangladesh. There were farmers from the Congo. There were farmers from, like I said, Somalia. It was amazing. It was amazing. So I would love to take this conversation and look at farmers globally. I just haven't had a chance to do that. But that's kind of the big picture, right? Is to look at farmers, Black and brown farmers in different parts of the world. Look at the diaspora. I would love to do that.
And so Ashley also made an interesting point, and she says, the cover of the book, We Are Each Other's Harvest, reminds her of an image in an Israeli ad of two farmers holding garden hose as part of an initiative to connect the Jewish diaspora to the Holy Land. And so I don't know if you've ever seen that picture, but Ashley, listen, Ashley, if you email me that picture, I'll email it to Natalie and Stephen so that they can see it, because that might be an interesting juxtaposition there with regards to like connection to land and like ancestral heritage and things like that. If there are any more questions from the audience and you all want to type them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, now is the time to do that. I'm going to ask a question first, and then we will, if there's no questions from the audience, we'll transition out and I'll tell you all about what the next session of Entrepreneurial Appetite will be. The question that I ask at the end of all of these conversations is, if there were one more chapter of the book that you could write or you would have included, what would that have been? It could have been, and in your case, it could have been a poem, it could have been a picture, it could have been an essay that you wanted to write, and it maybe wasn't even the last chapter, but something that would have fit anywhere. What would you have included?
Oh, that's good. I think I would love to have had an interview like with Shirley Sherrod. I think that would have been amazing. You know, she was tapped by I think it was Clinton's administration to be like the Secretary of Agriculture, and then there was all this controversy and she ended up not being appointed. But she and her husband own like some incredible number of land, but she was part of a movement, you know, in the 60s to get people to go back to the land and help farmers and all that. And I've never met her, but I would love to. I think she either owns 1,200 acres or 12,000 acres. It's a lot of land. and she's still, out there. I would love to have met her and included her story in the book.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would love to have met her. Yeah.
Meet your heroes. That's half the reason why I do a podcast, because I get to meet people that I want to meet. So if there are no other questions, here we go. This is from Loeka, and he is asking, what note about farming would you put in a capsule for our children's children? So if you're doing like, those time capsules, you did it. Yeah, that's a good, I like that. Maybe we just put the whole book in there.
What would you put?
Ooh, bounce. You asking me or you asking Loeka?
I'm asking Stephen, what would he put?
Go ahead, Stephen.
I mean, of course, some seeds. I'm gonna put like a seed bank of like as many different varieties from around the world in there. That's gonna be number one. If I could put a second component to that, or maybe in that seed bank, there are some basic principles, I think, to life. And we don't need to go into the synthetic world that I think is being created at the moment. And so I would just say, keep it organic. Hashtag. Keep it organic.
Yeah.
100%.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. Natalie, Stephen, I appreciate both of you being here. The conversation was great. I want to reiterate, I told Natalie this before we got started. Of all the books that I've done for Entrepreneurial Appetite, this is the most beautiful book that we've read, right? And we've had books that were written very well, books that were compilations. Like, we didn't do the 1619 project for the podcast or the book club, but that book is a compilation of like poetry, stories, history, all of that stuff, and it's well written. Like, this book has some of that in it. But then I've had other books that were more picturesque. So my friend Kendra Barnes wrote this book called Acres, and it had some prose, and it had some literature in there, but it was a gorgeous book with pictures. You could see the people who were investing in real estate. And I feel like this book is the best of both worlds. It is aesthetically pleasing to the eye, but then it has like all this art and history and policy and law stuff in there, all mixed in together. And if you take the time to look up who some of the authors are who are included, who aren't Natalie, if you take the time to look up some of the figures who are in the book, like, you will see like this deep intertwining of Black history in there as well. And so if you get the book, when you get the book, because you should get the book, read it, but then also like do a deeper dive of the folks who are presented in there. So Natalie, again, thank you for joining us, and Stephen, you did a great job facilitating.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure, a real pleasure.
Thank you. Honor. Thank you, Natalie, for making time today. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Keep up the great work. I'm waiting for volume 2.
Okay, and I may come to see you in San Antonio. Don't be surprised.
Come on. We're ready.
Okay. Okay.
And so for those of you in the audience, bear with me for a moment. I'm gonna give you all a preview of what we have up next. Natalie, Stephen, you all are free to go. We are going to continue the conversation about farming. All right. And so if you all read the book, there's a mentioning of Sankofa Farms by Kamal Bell, and he's a graduate of North Carolina A&T, my alma mater. And so I just got to point out that we're going to do this conversation, the next conversation later on this month, with Dr. Antoine Alston, who's a professor at North Carolina A&T. He is one of the co-authors of the book, The Legacy of the New Farmers of America, which talks about a group of African Americans who were building the foundation for agricultural education in our community. And so we want to continue this conversation and highlight the work of Black farmers and Black folks' connection to the land. And also want to make you all aware that if you want to support the show, in a more consistent way, you can do so by becoming one of our founding 55 patrons. And you can use the QR code there to do so. As one of the founding 55 patrons, you get access to our live conversations. You get early access to the recordings. You get early access to the conversations that aren't live when we do special series and whatnot. And what this is going to go to do specifically is support the hiring of an intern. We know that Black folks, Black students, Black college students are less likely to get a paid internship. And so I want to stand in that gap and offer someone some training on podcast editing and promotion and social media, all of that good stuff. Because as Stephen says, we want to keep it organic. I don't want the AI taking away good opportunities from folks in the community who already, don't get those opportunities as well. So thank you all for joining us. You will get an email about the recording of the show if you want to listen to it again once I get all the editing done. So I appreciate your support. Thank you and have a good evening.